I guess Palsteron here, and today let's talk about the third Warrior Ascendancy, the Smith of Kitava. So currently we have two Warrior Ascendancies, which is the Titan and the Warbringer. Both have had mixed results. The Titan, on the one hand, very strong. The Warbringer lacks a lot of depth, let's put it that way. Now, we obviously had some Warcry builds that did really well, and I think Turtle Charm is honestly just absolutely bonkers. We'll have to see what happens to evasion, we'll have to see what happens to block, but it was kind of rough because the left side was lacking. These nodes are kind of bugged. Armor on enemies is kind of bugged, and the totem nodes really lacked a little bit of punch. Most things were just better on Titan, but it's getting a lot spicier now for Warrior. Titan is about to get quite a bit of competition. Now, this is the Ascendancy that I've seen the most people talk about, especially hardcore players, but obviously not just. Just because you play softcore doesn't mean you want to be squishy as hell, and this game doesn't even allow it very often. So I don't think we have to be all that weird about it. It's not really a softcore hardcore divide. This is just a great Ascendancy. I want to talk about some things that I'm not too sure about, especially the right side of this tree, but we're gonna get all into it. Let's start with the most obvious picks, and that is Coalstoker and Forged in Flame. And to be honest, while I mean theory crafting, like we can't really right now, no patches, but thinking about setups on what you want on this Ascendancy, I could never come up with anything where you wouldn't want these two. So Coalstoker basically gives you modifiers to fire res, also grant cold and lightning res at 50% of their value. So in practicality, if you have 115 fire res, because in PoE 2 it starts at minus 40 res, right? You would be capped at 75 anyways, and the node would give you 57% cold res and 57% lightning res on top. So if you think about capping res as like a whole, just like res, you need this and this much res, it basically doubles that, which is pretty great because a build is obviously a composition of a lot of different variables, and suffixes are one of those. So suffix pressure is a thing, although it is not as big as in Path of Exile 1, for example, but that's also because there's not too many good uniques right now. However, how good this node is will very much resonate with, for example, how many good uniques there are in the game. So the more good uniques there are going to come out, the more you're going to see this node shine. But in general, 43 fire res would also result in, for example, half of that in cold and lightning res, which means you would, for example, save a suffix. So it's just a very efficient node. And besides that, for League Start, it is just incredible because what you can do is you can just go 2 ruby rings and, well, you're basically going to be capped. And the idea of that is going into Forge and Flame, which is your huge payoff node. I just want to make clear that this node alone is already very cozy, especially on League Start. Modifiers to maximum fire res also grant maximum cold and lightning res. This is basically exactly like the Chieftain node from Path of Exile 1, so which is called Valakos, I think. Yeah, straight up, where can you get fire res from? Now, the big thing about Forged in Flame that it has a synergy that isn't really there in PoE 1, which is unnatural resilience. 2 max fire res for each 40 uncapped fire res. There is a possibility to nerf this, for example, to 1, but otherwise this is completely, utterly ridiculous. So you could, for example, stack fire resistance, and while you're stacking fire res, even if you go higher than what you would need, you would also be able to cap your cold and lightning res. So for example, if we say 115 is needed to be capped on fire, if you want to go to max, that's actually 130, because you want to get to 90 max res, which is completely broken. You would now need 130 plus, times 2, you would go to 260 res, and if you divide that by 2, you would also be exactly capped on cold and lightning. And meanwhile, you would also get all the max fire res here already. I know a lot of people have been talking about, I don't know, getting 5 max fire res here, runes and whatnot. I don't really think that's going to be necessary unless they change this node. Also, don't forget about rubies. Rubies also give you up to 2 max res right here. So this is probably the most efficient way to get max fire res in general. You don't even need any Adorn shenanigans. Just like slap a few of these on, just like Infernalist did last league, and you're gonna get there really easily. Also, if you look at max res options right now, there isn't really much to get. If you wanted to get like max cold, max fire, max lightning, each on their own, you would have to spend so many points and so many jewel suffixes that is just crazy. So having that shortcut will, like, the opportunity cost is massive, worth way more than 1 Ascendancy point. So in general, for life-based builds, which only have between 3 and 5k life, instead of the huge life pool, having that amount of elemental damage reduction from Smith of Kitava is just something you cannot replace anywhere. Now, the reason why maximum resistance is so strong is because it's deceptively strong the higher you get. Imagine, for example, a 75 max res character that has an incoming hit of 100. It's pretty easy, right? It comes out at 25 damage. 75% of that 100 is basically reduced. And then you have 90 max res. The incoming hit of 100 would get reduced down to 10. So if you do the math on that, that means you actually take 60% less elemental damage. And that is what you're getting from this Ascendancy straight up with this combo. Not just that, but the small nodes also have fire res. So while you're clearing everything in the act and while you're doing your first 2 Ascendancies, you basically already get a ruby ring's worth of fire res plus whatever you find on top. You also get 10 fire res from the campaign from Chiguanis, which also then converts into 5 cold and 5 lightning res. So in general, this Ascendancy is gonna mean you're gonna be capped at 90 res in maps. If you even have any sliver of anything, it is going to be almost impossible not to, which means it's going to be a really cozy progression because we still have a little bit of issues with portals. They did dial it back a little bit and they made it a little bit less punishing, but in general, still nice to be tanky. But the way more important thing is that it will make gearing a lot easier. So if you think about League Start, where you need to look for life, you need to look for attributes mainly, and you need to look for resistances. That was kind of a pain in the butt often, but instead of going for resistances on your ring, you can now very often just go for attributes. So this is called suffix pressure, and it will alleviate a lot of that just by taking your first 2 Ascendancies. Yeah. Then we have the skill Manifest Weapon, which we have kind of seen. We don't really know how it will interact. Will it scale with your weapon damage? Maybe somehow. Will it actually want you to be a minion build on this Ascendancy, which is very out of the way, very unlikely. Maybe it buffs you. Maybe it has like an aura, depending on what weapon you animate. We don't really know anything. All we know is that there's usually some kind of utility to it, right? You can support it with Calling Strike, you can support it with Exposure. Maybe it draws some aggro. Very hard to guess, but usually if there is a random minion on an Ascendancy that doesn't have any sort of utility, like for example, Infernalist's Loyal Hellhound, then there's just not much use for it. But I'm sure they have something in mind just throwing it on there. And since there's no minion damage anywhere near the Warrior starting area, there's got to be something about this. Then we have Temper Weapon, which would have to be ridiculously good to be playable, almost comically good, because I'll play it in the background, but you have to charge this up, right? You basically throw it, like you throw the hammer on the anvil 4 times, right? You prep your weapon, and then you have 4 attacks that will get some amount of extra damage and like a little bit of explodey attached to it. It's not huge, but it is something. And I just don't know how you're going to play that. I don't know when you have time to do that. If you get stunned during those like 3-ish seconds it takes for you to prep your weapon, or do you have to cast it again? I don't know. Like, I just don't really know who this would be for. But maybe it does scale with cast speed. So for example, if you have a lot of skill speed on your attack-based build, which also counts for cast speed, and you throw like an Arcane Tempo on this for 25% more cast speed. I'm assuming it's like a cast, so maybe you can somehow make this viable. We'll have to look at the number, but the number would have to be goofishly high, like something around 100% to even think about this. Then we have Fire Spell on hit, which we don't really know much about other than it's going to be a meta skill. It's most likely going to be similar to other meta skills and going to have kind of like an energy that you have to build up, and then you're going to proc something off of it. So for example, you could stick something like a DD in there and maybe have something akin to in PoE1 like a cock DD. And yeah, that is definitely possible. We don't know what is going to proc this. Most likely anything, at least if we're going off of the other meta skills, but maybe it is melee only. Maybe you actually have to hit with a melee weapon to connect. Otherwise, this node could be wide open. We don't really know the numbers, so it's hard to say. And that is definitely a theme with all of these three. However, with Fire Spell and hit, one idea I had that I think could actually be semi-viable is something like Molten Blast. Doesn't really have a home right now, and it is because it's in a melee area. It doesn't really scale with a lot of the melee stuff. It does not have a melee tag, but it also doesn't really fit into the ranger. Like, it just doesn't really have a home, and it is a strong skill that could be viable. So you could, for example, do Molten Blast with like Scatter Shot and then have a Flame Wall proccing off of it, which usually it's annoying having to cast both, but being able to automate that could be extremely, extremely valuable. I already have something in mind that I'm might be thinking about. But that's basically the left side of this tree. You have 2 no-brainer nodes, which I don't know how you would not take them. So you kind of had 4 points locked into this Ascendancy, and then you have 3 question marks. And then we get to the right side. And this is where we have to talk Smith's Masterwork. So this node is, from what I heard so far, in my opinion, a little bit overrated. Not the Ascendancy as a whole. I think the Ascendancy is going to be good regardless, just because of these 2 points. I'm just not sure it's that good. So let's talk about what this does. So you apply this point, which doesn't take anything. You just take it for free. But it means that you can only use a normal body armor. So from the get-go, whatever you have here, like your insane endgame body armor with like 2,000 armor, thinking that armor would be good this patch, who knows, or your Cloak of Flame or whatever, that is now gone. It can't be there. It has to be a normal body armor. Now, a few things about this downside before we get into the nodes. It is noticeable that you are probably going to get a perfect implicit. So this rolls from 1.5 to 2.5. And usually if you want the good body armor, you kind of have to take what you get. So you might have to take like a 2.1 or a 1.9 or whatever. But in this case, you only need a normal body armor, so you can seek out the one with the perfect implicit, and then also corrupt it for maybe a 3rd rune, right? Because you still can use runes even on white ones. Now, I don't think the max fire res is really going to be necessary, but you could maybe go for something like life or a few other ones if you really wanted to. Maybe rarity, who knows? But yeah, you're still going to have 3 runes. You can have the base armor on the body armor, or evasion or energy shield, whatever you want, and you're going to have an implicit. You also cannot use unique body armors, which, for example, would be, you can't use Warrior Invictus, which is currently one of the absolute meta picks in a ton of builds, and you also can't use something like a Cloak of Flame. But what do you get for that? Well, you get the ability to allocate freely what your body armor is. You basically make your own body armor. However, each of these picks cost you an Ascendancy point. So we're just going to go through it and then kind of talk about how I think this is actually going to fit in. Dedication to Kitava currently is kind of ass, and that is because the armor is being applied before resistances. So it's not like, oh, incoming hit gets reduced by resistances and then the armor applies to chaos. No, it doesn't. So armor is very, very inefficient with those kind of hits because chaos hits are balanced around you having a certain amount of resistances. So I don't think this node is going to be good unless it's going to be hotfixed, or maybe it's a bug. I don't know. I don't think it is, but it could be a bug. Body armor grants 100% increased stun buildup. Kind of weak. It's okay. 75 cold res, 75 fire and lightning res. Not really useful, right? Most likely, you're not going to even take the fire res. Fire res would be the obvious choice because it also gives you lightning and cold res. But I don't think any of those are particularly that strong. You can already get like 40-ish on a body armor. But if anything, you would take fire res as like your last pick if you really needed to. Body armor grants unaffected by ignite. This node doesn't just make you ignite immune. It says unaffected, which also means you still keep the ignite while not taking any damage from it, which could in the future maybe have, some kind of synergy. And then we have probably the best one here, which is body armor grants 15% increased maximum life, which is kind of impossible to get. If you look at some of the notables you get is like 3% max life. Is barely worth it instead of just going for more flat. So, yeah, it is an absolute premium stat. You can't even get that on a body armor. So, very, very strong right there. Also, body armor grants 20% increased strength. There is a chance that Gemling Legionnaire is going to take a big hit when it comes to stat stacking. So, maybe if there's like a strength stacker that doesn't really care about int dex all that much, doesn't really have any synergy with those, it's not going to be an attribute stacker, but a strength stacker, then you could think about going Titan, and 20% strength is quite a bit. Then body armor grants 5% life regen. That is probably, in my opinion, the most interesting one because it is really hard to get regen on the tree currently. The most efficient percentage regen sources we have right now is Abyssal Cuirass implicit up to 2.5. You have a helmet corruption that goes up to 2%, which is a ton, and that is about it. All the tree is really a collection of 0.5 to 0.2, and then maybe if you have a totem down, you can go down here for Ancestral Mending. So honestly, getting 5% regen is pretty big because what there is a lot on the passive tree is more multipliers to your regen, life regeneration rate. If you had 100% life regeneration rate, for example, this 5% would turn into 10. And also you can get them on rubies. You can collect 15% on each one of them alongside maximum fire res, for example. Then we have body armor grants. Hits against you have 50% reduced crit damage taken. As far as I understand, this is actually a less multiplier to how much enemies deal extra crit damage, and it should scale additively with something like battle hardened, so it could be very nice for something like hardcore. Not 100% sure it is worth taking here. Then you have molten symbol, which I'm just assuming people will take if they go into this build your own body armor. Body armor grants 25 of fizz from hits taken as fire. Now there's the obvious comparison to Cloak of Flame, which actually gives you 40%, and it is a very premium stat right now. You also get up to like 50% fire res, which is also super synergistic. Once again, because of the other side here with Fortunate Flame and Cold Stalker. And at the end, we have 5% max fire res. I would be surprised if this is actually needed in the build, maybe early on to fill in something, but with Unnatural Resilience, which could once again change, and a few of the other things, you also get 1 max res here, and you could also go for 1-1-1 here if you wanted to, plus the jewels. It's gonna be kind of rough to justify taking 5 max res here. You can also get them from runes on your normal body armor. In general, if I think about a setup on this, I would probably think about definitely the 15% max life, probably 20 strength, even if you're not a strength stacker, because that is a lot of flat life, but it depends on a little bit of like your composition of your gear, how much flat do you already have. Then you might go for 5% life regen, even with just a little bit. Having like 10-15 regen on a character feels incredible, especially if you go for something like blood magic. And then you would most likely go molten symbol. That is kind of the 4 setup that I would think about. Now, when it comes to the Smith Masterwork, I think it is extremely strong early. And what I mean by that is there's a good chance you go Cold Stalker on your first Ascendancy during your campaign, but then on the second one, you can probably go for something like percentage life or fizz taken as, or maybe even fill in some fire res if you really need to. Pretty unlikely though, also because those small nodes have fire res, but this is just a ton to pick from. And early on, if you think about how your body armor is going to look like, it's not going to be good, right? It's going to have 15 strength and, I don't know, 14% increased armor. So during the campaign and even early into maps, all these choices are incredible. Strength might make it easier to, for example, go for something like Giant's Blood early. Big deal, obviously the life. But yeah, I mean, I see this as an absolute win early. However, there's 2 issues I have with this. This side only makes sense if you have 4 points left. I say 4 points because there's no way you're not taking Cold Stalker and Fortunate Flame. So you're going to have 4 points left to spend on here. And then it is, I would say, decent. I don't think this is going to be broken. The broken part is this. But I think you can kind of rearrange it where probably a body armor would be significantly worse-ish. But it will depend on the build. The problem I have the most with this side of the Ascendancy is it's really hard to take. Well, first up, it's really hard to take if you're armor evasion ES based, because that is where body armors kind of shine. If you look at just how much armor you can get on a body armor, it is kind of wild. And you might say, oh, armor is bad right now. But I mean, you would be losing 2,000 base armor, which then gets multiplied by all the increases. We don't know what happens to armor. And this is not just true for armor, right? It's the same for evasion or energy shield. You're not locked into armor and just life on here. You can do whatever you want, right? You can path around the tree. If you are into any of those, this is going to be a rough sell because you're going to lose a ton of flat from your rare body armor. But the hardest thing here is, once again, you can only take it if you have 4 points left, because if you took it on 2 points, it would be pretty bad, right? Because now you're still you still have the same sacrifice, but you have half the payoff. And, well, it could be weird if one of these 3 turn out to be good. So what are you going to do, right? Like, let's say one of these 3 is a must-have for your build. Let's say Manifest Weapon, you take it, and it's going to be like, okay, what do you do for the rest of your 2 points? Now you can't take the right side, so now you might have to take small nodes or maybe a Manifest Weapon just for Calling Strike. Not 100% sure, but that's the only thing about this Ascendancy that's maybe a little bit awkward. Also, you could argue that if you get into Mirror Tier territory, which for most people is not going to be interesting, a rare body armor will probably even beat this. But as a TLDR, I think this Ascendancy is ridiculous early on. And I think very strong in endgame. We don't really have a good way to get max res right now. I actually think there's a good chance that armor gets buffed a little bit. You at least get decent physical damage reduction with it. You don't even bother with this. You just go for a chunky body armor with a lot of armor. You just get a lot of armor scaling going. You're going to have like 20, 30k armor. And you have a very well-rounded build because on the elemental side, you have max res. On the fizz side, you have armor. Chaos res, well, we're gonna have to see. But yeah, it will depend on how good these skills are, whether this Ascendancy is good or broken. I can see it either way. But just to be clear, I don't think the right side in particular is like broken or anything because of the opportunity cost. You are still, right, even if we're not talking about any unique body armor like Invictus, even then, right, if we're just talking about a rare, you're still losing attributes from the suffixes. You're losing armor, evasion, energy shield. You're losing resistances that you probably have to get back anywhere else. Now, you could argue that the resistance are not that big of a deal because of Cold Stalker. Maybe you don't care about armor, evasion, and energy shield, and that's all fine and dandy, and that's going to be situations where the right side is going to be good. I'm just saying I don't think that's necessarily a no-brainer. The no-brainer is here, and then hopefully you have something to add on top of it. But yeah, that's about all I got to say. I expect a lot of people to league start this because it is so goddamn consistent. It will make your gearing so easy. And people say, oh, there's no damage here. I totally understand that downside, but you also have to realize how easy it is to cap your resistances, get tanky, which means you can spend a lot more of your currency, especially in trade, on your weapon instead of trying to fix your res and attributes, especially res and attributes, which are both suffixes, can be rough on day 1, day 2. Maybe that's just because last time around I didn't know what I was doing completely. Maybe this time it's going to be easier, but I just feel like picking this Ascendancy can never really be wrong. Another reason why I like the Ascendancy is that offensive Ascendancies in this game are kind of weak. If you look at it comparatively, you'll see a lot of nodes that have between 20-ish, maybe 25% more damage, and they usually have some kind of catch. We're not looking at Stormbeaver right now, but everybody else. So offensive Ascendancies don't seem to be as good in general as defensive ones. It's also easier to get offenses from the passive tree because, well, for example, for a life-based build, you don't have any life scaling here. So you're just wandering from damage node to damage node anyways. So having a defensive Ascendancy, a fully defensive Ascendancy is, I don't really think, that much of an issue. You are just kind of counterbalancing what's missing on the tree regardless. And with that said, pretty hyped about this one, pretty stoked until patch notes come out. This one will also hinge a little bit on how good armor is, I think, so you kind of have a well-rounded character. Or maybe you're just going to end up slapping a Cloak of Flame on the character. Maybe you don't even care about the right side at all because Cloak of Flame also has fire res, very synergistic. You also get a little bit of physical damage reduction. So we'll have to see. But yeah, with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.